Part 1. The Beginning. Chapter 1. Abraham, Ishmael, and the Covenant. Let us begin with how it all began. Prophet Abraham is the father of the three monotheistic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Islam is the continuation and culmination of the Abrahamic tradition of the worship of one God. Islam teaches that all prophets were given this core creed to convey to their communities. Accordingly, Islam acknowledges their significance and preserves their teachings. This includes all of God's great servants like Adam, Noah, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, Zechariah, Jesus Christ, John the Baptist, and culminating in Prophet Muhammad, who is seen as the end to the prophethood. Prophet Muhammad was the only prophet from the descendants of Ishmael. As such, it becomes important to remind the reader of this narrative. In the following section, we'll briefly discuss Ishmael and his contributions towards the fulfillment of God's plan and prophecy. To illustrate this, we will highlight the more significant passages of the Old Testament. To begin, Ishmael was the first son of Abraham, born through the concubine Hagar and the maidservant of Sarah. Although having concubines is not acceptable in today's culture, this was a rather normal practice at that time. For instance, Genesis 16:1-2 states, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maid, whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, Now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I will obtain children through her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Clearly, these verses demonstrate that not only was it Sarah's idea for Abraham to have relations with Hagar, but that their offspring would astonishingly be considered children of the master Sarah. This is ironic because it is widely believed by Jews and Christians that Ishmael is an illegitimate child and his birth is unholy. Such views are not only disrespectful to Ishmael and Hagar, but also to Abraham and Sarah, who were the initial actors. After all, Hagar was only being obedient to her masters. Speaking ill about Ishmael and ignoring Isaac's descendants is quite disingenuous. It is documented within the Bible that 4 of the 12 sons of Jacob were conceived through his wives' maids. In Genesis 34-13, we learn that Bilhah, Rachel's maid, bore Jacob 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Also, Zilpah, Leah's maid, bore Gad and Asher. These 4 sons of Jacob are not said to be illegitimate, nor are they distinguished from the other 8. As Muslims, we regard them highly and refer to them as the 12 sons of Jacob. However, regarding Ishmael, Muslims believe that Hagar was the wife of Abraham, thus rendering the illegitimacy argument irrelevant. This is further corroborated by Genesis 16:3, which states that Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, the Egyptian, her maid, and gave her to her husband as his wife. Furthermore, if we look more closely at some of the passages from the Bible concerning Ishmael and Hagar, we begin to realize that they are very holy and obedient people. This is demonstrated in Genesis 16:10-11. Moreover, the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly multiply your descendants so that they will be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her further, Behold, you are with child, and you will bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has given heed to your affliction. Genesis 16:10-11. These promises are also made in a similar manner to Abraham and his family. To Abraham, Genesis 12:2, And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. To Sarah, Genesis 17:16, I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her. To Ishmael, Genesis 17:20, As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I will bless him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. To Isaac, Genesis 26:24, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. These passages clearly put Ishmael in a category among righteous and holy people. In fact, God praises and protects the well-being of Hagar and Ishmael when they were driven into the desert. Genesis 21:17-20, God provided comfort and sustenance during their time of need. Do not fear, Hagar, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Rise, lift up the lad, and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. God was with the lad, and he grew. These verses confirm that God had a special place for Hagar and Ishmael, because he was with them, and even though they were expelled from their home, although Muslims have a slightly different version of the circumstances of their migration to Mecca, it is evident that their departure was part of the divine plan. Hence the last sentence of Genesis 16:12 states, And he will live to the east of all his brothers. One he can observe before Ishmael's birth, God foretold the birth of Isaac, planning for both brothers to live separately. Thus the ordeal of Hagar and Ishmael's relocation should not be viewed pejoratively as depicted in the Old Testament. According to the Bible, it was Sarah who turned hostile towards Hagar and Ishmael, claiming that their company was inappropriate for her son Isaac. Genesis 21:10 affirms, "Therefore she said to Abraham, Drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be in heir with my son Isaac." This negative portrayal of Sarah does not suit her status of being not only Abraham's wife, but also the mother of nations. Ironically, Muslims will defend her character and reject any suggestion of impropriety and jealousy on her part. Furthermore, the same can be said regarding the relationship between Isaac and Ishmael. The Bible implies that the relationship was adversarial and filled with jealousy, which is again not exemplary character displayed by men of God. However, this is what we extrapolate when we read the biblical account. It is unfortunate that the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael have over the centuries exhibited animosity and suspicion, which was not demonstrated by the immediate sons of Abraham. Quite the contrary, as both sons buried their father, and both Ishmael and Isaac gave each other's children in matrimony. One should not reveal their prejudices for their own selfish reasons by diminishing the honor and integrity of Ishmael in order to lift and raise the rank of Isaac. Each individual contributed differently in their own way as predetermined by God. Ishmael and Hagar's contributions to God's plan are the 1.57 billion Muslims who worship the God of Abraham and Ishmael. Is their covenant that Muslims honor and uphold. The covenant that I am referring to is found in Genesis 17:7, which states, "I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and your descendants after you." This verse is one of the most revealing verses that sustain the claims that Muslims follow the traditions of their forefathers. The basic principle of the covenant establishes an everlasting agreement to reaffirm God's commitment to Abraham and his descendants. Essentially, God will continue to make him known to the descendants of Abraham in order that they worship and serve him alone. This came to pass as God sent prophets and scriptures to various tribes and nations in order to guide them to the straight path. Concurrent to this viewpoint, Muslims believe that all prophets after Abraham descended from his offspring, and as such he is known as the father of the prophets of God. As a sign or seal of entering within this covenant, God required that every male be circumcised. "This is my covenant, which you shall keep, between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you." Genesis 17:10-11. Thus, in compliance to this decree, Abraham and Ishmael, and every male in his family were circumcised. Genesis 17:26 states, "In the very same day Abraham was circumcised, and Ishmael his son." This verse is significant because it suggests that not only is Ishmael included within God's covenant with Abraham, but he entered that covenant on the very same day Abraham did. What is even more remarkable is that their circumcision and entrance into the covenant is nearly 1 year prior to the birth of Isaac. It is unfortunate that Jews and Christians completely ignore this fact. They vehemently oppose any notion that Ishmael and his descendants, namely Arabs and Muslims, have any covenant with God. They contend that Isaac and his descendants are the only people who have God's covenant conferred upon them. To validate this claim, they cite Genesis 17:19-21, which states, "God said, No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this season next year." 19-20. These verses clearly suggest that Isaac and not Ishmael had been chosen by God to keep and maintain the covenant. Ostensibly, there does appear a contradiction between Genesis 17:7 and 17:21. Certainly, God did not require Ishmael and every male in Abraham's household to be circumcised needlessly. This being said, how then can we explain this inconsistency? It is obvious that God can make a covenant or agreement with anyone or anything, and it need not be exclusive. For example, in Genesis 6:18, God makes a covenant with Noah. "But I shall establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark." Therefore, one can reasonably believe God can and does have more than one covenant without there appearing to be any contradiction. It is clear that there is no contradiction between the covenant Ishmael entered in Genesis 17:7 and Isaac's exclusive covenant in Genesis 17:21. In essence, the covenant made with Isaac is simply a more specific covenant in which God selected Isaac to establish a community that would be exclusively founded on God's laws. This does not, however, abrogate the covenant of Genesis 17:7, which Ishmael and his descendants entered into to worship the one God. Isaac not only shares in the covenant made by Genesis 17:7, but he had a special covenant with God in Genesis 17:21. Isaac's covenant came to fruition when God chose his descendants, mainly the sons of Jacob, who received guidance in scriptures through numerous prophets more so than any other community. God's commitment was honored from the time of Abraham to the time of Jesus, who was the last prophet sent to the sons of Jacob until the covenant was broken by them. The Bible states, "My covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them," Jeremiah 31:32. "Thus says the Lord, if you break my covenant for the day and my covenant for the night, so that day and night will not be at their appointed time, then my covenant may also be broken with David, my servant, so that he will not have a son to reign on his throne, and with Levitical priests, my ministers. Jeremiah 33:20-21. We read throughout the Bible countless egregious sins committed by the descendants of Jacob, including killing prophets, idol worship, manipulating scriptures, disobedience of law, and so forth. This inevitably led God to break his covenant with the Jewish people. Muslims believe the turning point occurred when the Jews sought to crucify Jesus, their Messiah, who was sent to save the house of Israel. For he shall save his people from their sins, Matthew 1:24. However, their pride led most of them to deny Jesus, his prophethood, and his gospel, resulting in their old practice of murdering men of God. The reader may find such a line of reasoning to be harsh, but reality in this case cannot be avoided. In matters of truth, one must speak the truth. Since Prophet Jesus was sent as the final prophet to the house of Israel, God in his infinite mercy sent the prophets to the Gentiles, namely the descendants of Ishmael. In the following section, I will highlight and examine the relevant biblical passages that foretold the coming of the prophet to and from the Gentiles. Before I document the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, let us first recapitulate what we have gathered about Ishmael, since Prophet Muhammad is the only prophet who was his direct descendant. 1. Ishmael entered into God's covenant with Abraham, Genesis 17:7. 2. God was with the lad as he grew, Genesis 21:20. 3. Ishmael settled in the land of the east, but to the sons of his concubines Abraham gave gifts while he was still living and sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east, Genesis 25:6. 4. God will make Ishmael a great nation, Genesis 17:20. A great nation implies that Ishmael and his descendants will be godly, because they must abide by the covenant that they serve and worship the one and only God. Once they strayed from this path and began to worship other gods, then it becomes necessary to send a prophet to bring them back to the worship of the one and only true God. This was the exclusive purpose for which prophets were sent. Yet he sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord. 2 Chronicles 24:19. Therefore, to maintain the covenant with Ishmael, God sent Prophet Muhammad to the Gentile Arabs who were engaged in idol worship among other transgressions in pre-Islamic Arabia. Prophet Muhammad's coming is prophesied in many verses of the Bible. The next chapter is devoted to an analysis of these passages.